There is a moment many people know very well, even if they rarely talk about it. It usually happens late at night. The house becomes quiet, the lights are off, everything around you seems calm. But inside your mind, something else begins. Thoughts start appearing one after another. You remember something you said earlier in the day and wonder if you said the wrong thing. You think about tomorrow and imagine everything that could go wrong. You replay conversations. You revisit mistakes. You try to predict problems that have not even happened yet. And before you realize it, the quiet night is no longer quiet. The mind has become loud. Not long ago, someone close to me shared something that stayed with me for a long time. He said that on the outside, his life looked completely normal. He had a stable job, a comfortable home, people around him who cared about him. Yet every night, when everything slowed down, his mind began running faster. He would lie in bed, thinking about things he could not control. What if the future goes wrong? What if I make a mistake at work? What if things suddenly change? The strange part was that none of these problems were actually happening in that moment, but the mind treated them as if they were real. And the more he tried to push the thoughts away, the stronger they seemed to return. Maybe you have experienced something similar. Maybe you have noticed how easily the mind drifts into worry, even when life is relatively peaceful. It is almost as if the mind has developed a habit of searching for problems, even when there are none. For thousands of years, philosophers and spiritual teachers have noticed this strange pattern in the human mind. Zen monks spoke about the restless nature of thought. Taoist philosophers described how the mind struggles when it tries too hard to control life. Even the Stoic thinkers of ancient Greece wrote about the suffering created by imagined futures. Across different cultures and centuries, they all pointed to a similar realization. Most of the stress we experience does not come directly from life itself. It comes from the mind constantly trying to predict, control, and solve a future that does not yet exist. In other words, worry is often the mind trying to protect us. But in doing so, it sometimes creates a prison made entirely of thoughts. The more we try to control every possible outcome, the more restless the mind becomes. Yet something remarkable happens when we begin to understand this. We start to notice that not every thought needs our attention, not every imagined problem needs to be solved, and not every uncertainty needs to be controlled. Slowly, the mind begins to loosen its grip. Instead of fighting every thought, we learn to observe them. Instead of trying to control the future, we begin to return to the present moment. And in that quiet space, something very simple begins to appear. Peace. Not the kind of peace that comes from having a perfect life, but the kind that emerges when the mind finally stops chasing every worry it creates. In this audiobook, we will explore why the mind worries so much, why it feels so difficult to stop, and how a small shift in understanding can gently transform the way we experience our thoughts. Because sometimes the greatest change in life does not come from fixing everything around us. It begins in a much quieter place, the moment we stop worrying. And in that moment, peace begins. One short note, and then we begin. You've just heard where we're going. Before Chapter 1, here's how the next hour will run. We don't run ad breaks inside these recordings. Audiobook Rise isn't in the YouTube partner program, so nothing gets inserted in the middle of a chapter. No commercial cutting across an idea while you're still holding it. From here to the final line, it's the narration and you. That's not free to do. Every recording takes hours of writing, narration, and editing, and we publish 2 to 3 of them a week. So if this channel has given you something worth keeping, you can support the work on Ko-fi. That's Ko-fi at ko-fi.com/audiobookrise. The link is in the description below. Any amount helps. None is expected. And if you'd rather just listen, then listen. That's what this was built for. Thank you for your time. It's the one thing you can't get back. Now, settle in. Chapter 1. The mind's hidden habit of worry. If you watch the mind carefully, you may notice something surprising. Worry rarely begins with something real. Most of the time, It begins with a thought, a small thought, sometimes so small that you barely notice it at first. Maybe it starts with a simple question. What if tomorrow goes badly? What if I make a mistake? What if something unexpected happens? At first, the thought seems harmless, just a moment of imagination. But then the mind begins doing what it has practiced for years. It starts building a story. One possibility becomes two. Two possibilities become 10. Soon the mind is exploring situations that may never happen at all, and suddenly, the body reacts. The shoulders become tense. The breathing becomes shallow. A quiet sense of pressure appears in the chest. All of this, from something that exists only inside the mind. Many people assume that worry is a natural response to difficult circumstances. But if you observe closely, you may discover that worry often appears even when nothing difficult is happening. You might be sitting peacefully at home. You might be walking outside on a calm afternoon. Yet the mind begins to search for something to worry about. Almost as if it has developed a habit. Not long ago, I noticed this pattern while speaking with someone I know. She told me that her days were usually fine. Work was manageable. Her relationships were stable. Nothing dramatic was happening in her life. But her mind rarely felt quiet. While driving home from work, she would suddenly start thinking about problems that had not happened. What if the company suddenly changes direction? What if something goes wrong with my career? What if the future becomes unstable? By the time she arrived home, her body felt as if she had been carrying a heavy weight all day. Yet none of those problems had actually appeared. They existed only in the imagination. This is one of the strange characteristics of the human mind. It does not simply experience reality. It constantly tries to predict the future. From an evolutionary perspective, this ability helped our ancestors survive. Thousands of years ago, being able to imagine danger could mean the difference between life and death. If early humans could predict where a predator might appear, they had a better chance of staying alive. So the brain became very skilled at scanning for potential threats. The problem is that the modern world is very different. Most people today are not being chased by predators. Yet the mind continues performing the same ancient task: searching, scanning, imagining possible dangers. Except now, those dangers often take the form of thoughts about the future. What if I fail? What if people judge me? What if things don't work out? The mind treats these imagined scenarios as if they are real threats, and the body responds accordingly. This is why worry can feel so physically exhausting. The body does not easily distinguish between a real danger and a vividly imagined one. But there is something even more interesting about worry. The mind often believes that worrying is useful. It tells itself that worrying means preparing, that worrying means being responsible, that worrying will somehow prevent bad things from happening. But if you reflect honestly on your own experience, you may notice something different. Worry rarely solves the problem it imagines. Instead, it simply repeats the same thought again and again, like a song stuck on repeat. You think about the situation. You imagine the worst outcome. You try to mentally solve it. Then a few minutes later, the same thought returns. The same scenario. The same fear. Nothing has changed, except the amount of energy the mind has spent. Over time, this repetition becomes familiar. So familiar that many people stop noticing it. Worry becomes the background noise of daily life, like a radio quietly playing somewhere in the room, always there, always talking. But the moment you begin observing the mind carefully, something important becomes clear. Worry is not always caused by the outside world. Often, it is created by the mind itself. The mind generates a thought, then reacts to its own creation, then tries to solve the imagined problem it just invented. It is a loop that can continue endlessly if we never question it. But once we begin to notice this pattern, a new possibility appears. Instead of automatically following every thought, we can pause. Instead of believing every story the mind creates, we can observe it. This simple shift changes everything, because the moment you realize that worry is often just a habit of thought, its power begins to weaken. the mind may still produce anxious ideas, but they no longer feel as convincing as before. You begin to see them for what they are, just thoughts, passing through the mind like clouds passing across the sky. And once you see this clearly, a deeper question begins to emerge. If the mind has learned the habit of worrying, could it also learn something else? Could it learn stillness? Could it learn to let thoughts come and go without chasing them? This is where the journey toward peace truly begins. Not by forcing the mind to stop thinking, but by understanding how the mind creates worry in the first place. And that understanding will lead us to the next insight. Because once we see how the mind creates worry. Chapter 2. Why the mind creates problems that don't exist. Once you begin observing the mind, something curious becomes clear. The mind does not simply react to reality. Very often, it creates its own version of reality. A version built almost entirely from imagination. You might be sitting quietly with nothing urgent happening around you. The day may even feel relatively peaceful, yet suddenly, a thought appears. What if something goes wrong in the future? At first, it is only a brief idea, just a passing possibility. But the mind rarely stops there. It begins building a story. You imagine how the situation might unfold. Then you imagine what might happen next. Then you imagine the consequences. Within a few moments, the mind has constructed an entire scenario, complete with problems, emotions, and outcomes that do not yet exist. The remarkable part is that the body responds as if the scenario were real. The heart rate changes. The muscles tighten. A quiet tension begins to spread through the body. All of this, from something that exists only inside a thought. This ability of the mind to imagine future problems is not entirely a flaw. In fact, it is one of the reasons humans survived for thousands of years. Our ancestors lived in environments filled with genuine danger. Predators, harsh weather, uncertain food supplies. Being able to imagine possible threats helped them prepare. If they could anticipate danger before it arrived, they had a better chance of surviving. So the brain developed a powerful skill, prediction. It learned to constantly ask questions like, what might go wrong? Where could danger appear? How can I avoid it? In the ancient world, this ability was extremely useful, but in the modern world, something strange happens. The brain continues using the same survival system, even when there is no immediate danger. Instead of worrying about predators in the forest, the mind now worries about things like, what if I fail? What if people judge me? What if the future becomes uncertain? The mind treats these imagined possibilities as if they were real threats. And because the brain is designed to protect us, it begins reacting immediately. This is why worry can feel so convincing. When the mind imagines a problem, the body responds as if the problem is already happening. But if you look closely, you may notice something important. Most of the situations we worry about never actually occur. Psychologists have studied this pattern for many years. They consistently find that the majority of human worries are about events that never take place. Yet the mind continues generating them anyway. Why? Because the mind prefers a negative story over uncertainty. Uncertainty is uncomfortable. The mind does not like the feeling of not knowing what will happen. So it tries to replace uncertainty with prediction, even if the prediction is unpleasant. In other words, the mind often chooses an imagined problem over an unknown future. It feels safer to believe something bad might happen than to accept that the future cannot be controlled. Once you see this pattern, you may begin to recognize it in everyday life. Consider a simple example. Imagine you send a message to someone and they do not respond for several hours. In that moment, reality is simple. They have not replied yet. That is all. But the mind rarely leaves the situation that simple. Instead, it begins creating explanations. Maybe they are upset with me. Maybe I said something wrong. Maybe something bad happened. Within minutes, the mind can construct an entire story filled with emotion and worry. Yet none of those explanations may be true. Perhaps the person simply forgot to check their phone. Perhaps they were busy. Perhaps nothing unusual happened at all. But the mind does not wait for reality to reveal itself. It rushes to fill the empty space with imagination. This pattern happens constantly in human life. We worry about conversations that have not occurred. We worry about problems that have not appeared. We worry about futures that may never exist. And in doing so, we spend enormous amounts of energy reacting to situations that live only in the mind. There is an old story often told in Eastern philosophy. A traveler is walking along a quiet path at dusk. Suddenly, he jumps back in fear. On the ground ahead, he sees what appears to be a snake. His heart races. His body freezes. He prepares to run, but after a moment, he looks more closely. In the fading light, he realizes something surprising. What he thought was a snake is only a rope lying on the ground. The danger existed only in his perception. The moment he sees the rope clearly, the fear disappears instantly. Nothing in the outside world changed. Only his understanding changed. In many ways, the mind works the same way. It often reacts to imagined dangers as if they are real. The body responds with tension, anxiety, and stress. But once we see the thought clearly, its power begins to dissolve. This does not mean we can completely stop the mind from imagining possibilities. The brain will always continue generating thoughts. That is simply what the mind does. But we can change our relationship with those thoughts. Instead of immediately believing every scenario the mind creates, we can pause. We can observe the thought. We can ask ourselves a simple question: is this happening right now? Often, the answer is no. It is only a possibility, only a story, only a thought passing through the mind. And when we begin to see this clearly, something subtle begins to shift. The mind becomes slightly quieter. The space between thoughts becomes slightly wider. We begin to recognize that not every thought deserves our attention. Some thoughts are useful. They help us solve real problems. But many thoughts are simply the mind repeating its ancient habit of scanning for danger. Once we understand this, we no longer feel the need to chase every imagined problem. We can allow the thought to appear and then gently let it pass, like clouds drifting across the sky. The sky does not fight the clouds. It simply allows them to move. And in the same way, the mind can learn to allow thoughts without becoming trapped inside them. This realization leads to an even deeper insight. If many of the things we worry about exist only in our thoughts, then perhaps one of the greatest sources of peace in life is learning when to stop trying to control everything. Because the mind often believes that controlling the future will eliminate worry. But the truth may be something very different. The more we try to control life, the more tension the mind creates. Which brings us to the next discovery, one that philosophers and spiritual teachers have been pointing to for centuries. Much of our suffering does not come from life itself. It comes from the illusion that we should be able to control it. Chapter 3. The Illusion of Control. If you observe the mind long enough, you may begin to notice another pattern hidden beneath worry. It is the quiet belief that life should be controllable. Not completely, perhaps, but at least enough that nothing unexpected happens. The mind wants the future to unfold in predictable ways. It wants plans to work. It wants people to behave in certain ways. It wants circumstances to follow the path we imagine. And when life moves in a different direction, the mind reacts with tension. Because beneath many worries lies a simple assumption. If I think about the future enough, I can control it. But reality rarely works that way. Life moves in ways that no mind can fully predict. Plans change. Opportunities appear unexpectedly. People behave in ways we never imagined. Sometimes events unfold beautifully. Other times they become difficult. This uncertainty is not a flaw in life. It is simply the nature of life itself. Yet the mind often struggles with this truth. It tries to solve uncertainty by creating control. You can see this in small moments throughout daily life. Someone carefully plans every detail of their day, hoping nothing will disrupt the schedule. A person replays conversations in their mind, hoping to avoid future misunderstandings. Another spends hours imagining different outcomes for an upcoming decision. Each of these actions comes from the same hidden desire: to reduce uncertainty, to make the future feel safer. But there is a quiet paradox in this effort. The more we try to control every possibility, the more restless the mind becomes, because the future contains far too many variables. No matter how carefully we plan, something unexpected will always appear. This is why philosophers throughout history have spoken about the limits of control. The ancient Stoics often divided life into two simple categories: things we can control and things we cannot. At first, this idea may sound obvious, but when you apply it honestly to everyday life, it becomes surprisingly powerful. You can control your effort. You can control your actions. You can control how you respond to situations. But many other things remain outside your influence. You cannot control the weather. You cannot control how every person thinks about you. You cannot control every outcome. And most importantly, you cannot fully control the future. Yet the mind often spends enormous amounts of energy trying to manage exactly those things. It tries to control the uncontrollable, and this is where worry quietly begins to grow. Because when the mind attempts to control something impossible, tension naturally appears. Imagine trying to control the movement of the wind. No matter how hard you try, the wind continues moving according to its own nature. Life behaves in a similar way. Events unfold through countless interacting factors, many of them far beyond our awareness. Trying to manage every possible outcome is like trying to hold water tightly in your hands. The harder you squeeze, the faster it slips away. This does not mean planning is useless. Planning can be helpful. Preparation can be wise. But there is a difference between thoughtful preparation and constant mental control. Preparation happens once. Control repeats endlessly. The mind keeps returning to the same imagined situations, trying again and again to predict every possibility. But life rarely follows those predictions. One of the quiet lessons found in many Eastern philosophies is the idea of harmony with uncertainty. Instead of fighting against life's unpredictable nature, we can learn to move with it. A simple image from nature illustrates this idea beautifully. Imagine a tall tree standing in the wind. If the tree is completely rigid, refusing to move, the strong wind may eventually break its branches. But if the tree is flexible, allowing itself to bend with the wind, it survives. The strength comes not from resistance, but from adaptability. Human life works in a similar way. When we try to force life into rigid expectations, we create unnecessary tension. But when we allow space for uncertainty, something interesting happens. The mind relaxes. We stop needing every outcome to unfold perfectly. We stop trying to predict every possible future. Instead, we focus on something much simpler: the present moment. What can be done right now? What can be improved right now? How we choose to respond right now. This shift in attention quietly dissolves many worries, because worry lives mostly in imagined futures. It depends on predictions, but when the mind returns to the present moment, those imagined futures lose much of their power. Consider a moment from your own life when something unexpected happened. Perhaps a plan changed suddenly. Perhaps an opportunity appeared when you least expected it. Or perhaps a difficulty turned out to contain a lesson you could not see at first. Life is filled with moments like this, moments that no mind could have predicted. Yet when we look back, many of those unpredictable moments shaped our lives in meaningful ways. This is why some philosophers suggest a simple shift in perspective. Instead of demanding that life follow our plans, we can approach life with curiosity. We can allow events to unfold without immediately labeling them as good or bad. This attitude does not remove uncertainty, but it removes the constant struggle against it. And when that struggle disappears, the mind begins to feel lighter, because the mind no longer carries the impossible burden of controlling the entire future. It simply focuses on what is real: this moment, this breath, this step, this conversation. When attention returns to the present, life becomes surprisingly manageable. Not because uncertainty disappears, but because the mind stops trying to fight it. And in that moment, something very quiet begins to appear again, a small space of calm. A feeling that perhaps life does not need to be controlled as tightly as we once believed. Perhaps life can simply be experienced. This realization leads us toward another important discovery. If the mind creates suffering by trying to control everything, then one of the most powerful things we can learn is how to let go. Chapter 4. The Quiet Power of Letting Go. At first, the idea of letting go can feel confusing. For many people, it sounds like giving up. It sounds like surrendering to life. It sounds like becoming passive or indifferent. But the kind of letting go spoken about in many philosophical traditions is something very different. It is not the act of abandoning effort. It is the act of releasing unnecessary resistance. There is a quiet difference between these two. Effort moves life forward. Resistance fights against what already exists. Most people are comfortable with effort, working toward goals, solving problems, improving their circumstances. But resistance often appears when life does not follow the plan we imagined. Something unexpected happens. A conversation does not go the way we hoped. A situation becomes more complicated than we expected. The mind immediately begins reacting. This shouldn't be happening. This is not how things were supposed to go. This must be fixed immediately. The more the mind argues with reality, the more tension it creates. Because reality does not change simply because the mind resists it. The event has already occurred. Yet the mind continues fighting it internally. This internal struggle is often what creates the deepest stress. Not the situation itself, but the refusal to accept that it is already happening. You may have experienced this in small moments. Imagine you are caught in unexpected traffic. The situation itself is simple. Cars are not moving. You cannot change the road conditions. But the mind begins reacting. This is terrible. I'm wasting time. This should not be happening. Within minutes, frustration begins rising. But notice something interesting. The traffic itself has not changed. What has changed is the mind's relationship with it. The mind is resisting reality. Now imagine a different response. You recognize the situation as it is. The road is slow. You cannot change it right now. Instead of fighting it mentally, you allow the moment to be what it is. The body relaxes slightly. The tension disappears. The external situation remains the same, but the internal experience becomes completely different. This simple shift is the essence of letting go. Letting go does not mean we stop acting when action is possible. If something can be improved, we improve it. If something can be solved, we solve it. But when something cannot be changed in the present moment, resistance only adds unnecessary suffering. Eastern philosophy often illustrates this idea through images found in nature. One of the most common examples is water. Water is incredibly powerful. Over time, it can shape entire landscapes, yet water rarely resists obstacles directly. When water encounters a rock, it does not fight the rock, it flows around it. When it meets a barrier, it adapts. Its strength comes not from force, but from flexibility. Human life can move in a similar way. When we stop resisting every unexpected situation, the mind becomes more flexible. We adapt more easily. We move through challenges rather than becoming stuck inside them. Another story often told in Zen traditions illustrates this principle beautifully. A student once asked a Zen teacher, "What is the secret to inner peace?" The teacher replied, "When I eat, I eat. When I walk, I walk." The student looked confused. "But everyone does that." The teacher smiled gently. "No, when most people eat, they think about many other things. When they walk, their minds are already somewhere else." The teacher was pointing toward a simple truth. Much of our tension comes from the mind constantly trying to be somewhere other than where we are. We resist the present moment because we wish it were different. We imagine better circumstances, better outcomes, better situations. But life is always happening in only one place, right now. Letting go means allowing this moment to exist without constantly arguing with it. This does not mean we stop improving our lives. It means we stop carrying unnecessary mental weight. Many people fear that letting go will make them less motivated, but often the opposite happens. When the mind is no longer filled with constant resistance, it becomes clearer. Decisions become simpler. Actions become more focused. Instead of reacting emotionally to every situation, we respond calmly. This calmness allows us to see solutions that anxiety often hides. Think of the mind like the surface of a lake. When the water is constantly disturbed, it becomes difficult to see clearly beneath the surface. But when the water becomes still, everything becomes visible. The same happens within the mind. When worry and resistance settle down, clarity appears. We begin to see situations more realistically. We begin to notice possibilities we previously overlooked. And most importantly, we begin to understand that many of the struggles we carried for years were not created by life itself. They were created by the mind's constant attempt to control and resist life. The moment we release that struggle, something remarkable happens. Life does not suddenly become perfect. Difficulties still appear, challenges still exist, but the mind is no longer fighting every experience. Instead of exhausting itself through resistance, it learns to move with life. And in that movement, something quietly returns. A sense of lightness. A sense of openness. A sense that perhaps peace was never as far away as we once believed. But there is another important discovery waiting beyond this understanding. Even when we begin letting go of resistance, the mind still has one habit that pulls it away from peace. It constantly leaves the present moment, traveling into the past or rushing into the future. If we want to understand how peace truly begins, we must look more closely at where the mind spends most of its time and why returning to the present moment can change everything. Chapter 5. Returning to the present moment. If you observe the mind long enough, you may begin to notice something very curious. The mind is rarely where life actually is. Life always happens in the present moment, right here, right now. But the mind often travels somewhere else. Sometimes it moves into the past. It replays old conversations. It revisits mistakes. It imagines how things could have been different. Other times, the mind rushes toward the future. It imagines problems that have not appeared. It predicts situations that may never happen. It tries to control events that do not yet exist. In both cases, something important happens. The mind leaves the present moment, and when the mind leaves the present moment, it often leaves peace behind as well. Consider how many worries are actually happening right now, in this exact moment. If you pause for a second and look carefully around you, you may notice something interesting. Perhaps you are sitting comfortably. Perhaps the room is quiet. Perhaps nothing urgent is happening at all. Yet the mind may still feel restless. Why? Because the mind is not reacting to the present. It is reacting to imagined futures. This is one of the quiet discoveries made by many philosophers and spiritual teachers across history. Much of human suffering comes from living mentally in times that are not real. The past exists only as memory. The future exists only as imagination. Yet the mind spends enormous amounts of time inside both of them. Meanwhile, the present moment, the only place where life actually unfolds, receives very little attention. A simple example can reveal this pattern clearly. Imagine you are having a conversation with someone. Your body is present. You are standing there. But your mind is somewhere else. Perhaps you are thinking about what you will say next. Perhaps you are worrying about how the other person is judging you. Perhaps you are replaying something that happened earlier in the day. In that moment, you are physically present, but mentally, you are far away. And because of this, the experience becomes tense. You feel pressure. You feel self-conscious. But imagine the same conversation with a different state of mind. Instead of worrying about the future of the conversation, you simply listen. You pay attention to the person speaking. You notice their words, their tone, their expression. Suddenly, the conversation becomes lighter, more natural. The pressure disappears. Nothing about the external situation changed. Only your attention changed. You returned to the present moment. This shift may seem small, but its effect can be profound. The present moment has a unique quality. It is the only place where the mind can truly rest. The past cannot be changed. The future cannot be fully controlled. But the present moment can be experienced. And when attention settles there, many worries lose their foundation. Think about a time when you were fully absorbed in something simple. Perhaps you were walking in nature, listening to music, cooking a meal, watching the sunset. In those moments, the mind often becomes quiet. Not because problems disappear from life, but because attention is fully engaged with what is happening right now. This state of presence is something children often experience naturally. A child playing with a toy is completely absorbed in the moment. They are not worrying about tomorrow. They are not replaying yesterday. They are simply experiencing the activity in front of them. As people grow older, the mind becomes more analytical, more concerned with planning, more concerned with outcomes. These abilities can be useful, but when they become constant, they pull attention away from the present moment. And this is where the feeling of mental overload often begins. The mind carries too many imagined futures, too many unfinished thoughts, too many predicted problems. But returning to the present moment does not require anything complicated. It often begins with something very simple, noticing what is happening right now, noticing your breath, noticing the sounds around you, noticing the feeling of your body sitting in a chair or standing on the ground. These small acts of attention gently anchor the mind in the present. And when attention returns to the present, something interesting happens. The stream of thoughts begins to slow. Not because we force the mind to stop thinking, but because the mind is no longer chasing every thought it produces. Instead, thoughts appear and pass naturally, like clouds moving through the sky. The sky does not try to hold on to the clouds. It simply allows them to pass. The mind can learn to do the same. When we stop chasing every thought, the mind becomes quieter. The constant commentary softens, and in that quiet space, something many people have been searching for begins to appear: peace. Not the kind of peace that comes from solving every problem, but the kind that comes from being fully present with life as it unfolds. Of course, the mind will still wander sometimes. It will return to the past. It will jump into the future. That is simply the nature of thought. But each time we notice this happening, we have an opportunity. We can gently bring attention back to this moment, back to what is real. Over time, this simple practice begins to reshape the relationship we have with our thoughts. The mind becomes less chaotic, less reactive, more spacious. And when the mind becomes spacious, we begin to see something clearly. Thoughts are not the same as reality. They are simply mental events passing through awareness. Once we understand this, we no longer feel the need to follow every thought that appears. Some thoughts can simply be allowed to pass. This understanding brings us to another important realization. When the mind becomes calm and present, it begins responding to life in a very different way. Instead of reacting impulsively to every situation, it develops a quiet strength, a steadiness that cannot easily be disturbed. And this leads us to the next discovery: why the calmest minds are often the strongest minds. Chapter 6. Why calm minds are hard to disturb. If you observe people carefully, you may notice an interesting difference in how they respond to life. Some people seem easily shaken. A small problem appears, and their mood changes immediately. A disagreement occurs, and their mind becomes restless. An unexpected situation arises, and anxiety quickly takes over. But there are other people who seem very different. They encounter the same challenges, the same uncertainties, the same unpredictable events. Yet their reaction is noticeably calmer. They do not rush into panic. They do not immediately assume the worst. They pause. They observe. then they respond. This difference has very little to do with intelligence. It has very little to do with personality. More often, it comes from the relationship they have with their own thoughts. People who are easily disturbed tend to believe every thought that appears in the mind. If the mind says, "This is terrible," they immediately feel terrible. If the mind says, "Something will go wrong," they begin imagining disaster. Their emotional state follows every movement of the mind. But people with calm minds have discovered something important. They have learned that thoughts are not commands. They are not facts. They are simply mental events. Once you see this clearly, your relationship with your thoughts begins to change. Instead of automatically reacting, you create a small space between the thought and your response. This space may last only a few seconds, but it changes everything. Because within that space, you gain the freedom to choose how you respond. Consider a simple situation that happens to many people. Someone criticizes you. Perhaps they question your work. Perhaps they make a negative comment. For many people, the reaction is immediate. The mind produces thoughts like, "They don't respect me. This is unfair. I need to defend myself." Emotions quickly follow: anger, embarrassment, frustration. But a calm mind responds differently. Instead of reacting instantly, it observes the situation first. It notices the words that were spoken. It notices the thoughts appearing in the mind, but it does not immediately follow them. There is a pause. In that pause, something interesting happens. Clarity appears. Perhaps the criticism contains useful information. Perhaps it comes from misunderstanding. Perhaps it reflects the other person's own stress. Without the immediate emotional reaction, the situation becomes easier to understand. And once understanding appears, the response becomes wiser. This ability to pause is one of the quiet strengths of a calm mind. It prevents the mind from becoming trapped in automatic reactions. Another example appears in moments of uncertainty. Imagine someone waiting for an important result. Perhaps a job decision. Perhaps an important message. Perhaps a situation that could affect the future. For many people, the mind immediately begins imagining negative outcomes. What if it goes wrong? What if everything falls apart? The mind constructs entire scenarios of failure, and the body reacts as if those scenarios are already happening. But a calm mind approaches uncertainty differently. It recognizes that the future has not yet arrived. Instead of exhausting itself through endless prediction, it focuses on what is real right now. Breathing, waiting, allowing events to unfold. This does not eliminate uncertainty, but it prevents the mind from suffering unnecessarily. Many philosophical traditions describe this ability as inner stability, a state where the mind remains steady even when circumstances change. This stability does not mean the person feels nothing. They still experience emotions. They still care about outcomes. But their emotional state is no longer controlled by every passing thought. Imagine the mind as the sky. Thoughts are like clouds moving across it. Sometimes the clouds are light. Sometimes they are dark. But the sky itself remains unchanged. A calm mind begins to recognize this difference. It sees that thoughts and emotions come and go, but awareness itself remains steady. This realization creates a sense of inner freedom, because once you understand that you do not have to follow every thought, the mind becomes far less chaotic. Problems still appear in life, but they are approached with clarity instead of panic. Decisions become easier. Actions become more deliberate. Even difficult situations become more manageable. There is a quiet confidence that begins to develop, not the loud confidence that demands certainty, but the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you can handle whatever appears. One of the most interesting things about calm minds is how they affect the people around them. When someone remains calm during a stressful situation, it often changes the atmosphere of the entire environment. Other people begin to relax. The situation becomes less chaotic. Solutions become easier to see. This is why calmness is often mistaken for strength. But in reality, calmness is a form of strength. It requires awareness, it requires patience, and it requires the ability to step back from the mind's constant stream of thoughts. The good news is that this ability is not something people are simply born with. It can be developed. Each time you notice a thought without immediately reacting to it, you strengthen this skill. Each time you pause before responding, you strengthen it again. Gradually, the mind becomes less reactive, more spacious, more stable. And once the mind becomes stable, something interesting begins to happen. Life starts to feel different. Situations that once created anxiety no longer feel overwhelming. Problems become easier to approach. Decisions become clearer. It is not that life suddenly becomes easy. It is that the mind is no longer fighting life constantly. And when that struggle disappears, a surprising realization appears. When worry loses its grip on the mind, life begins to feel lighter. Chapter 7. When worry disappears, clarity appears. There is a moment many people experience after they begin changing their relationship with worry. At first, the change is very small, almost unnoticeable. Nothing dramatic happens in the outside world. Life continues moving in the same unpredictable ways it always has. Challenges still appear, plans still change, uncertainty still exists, but something inside begins to feel different. The mind becomes quieter, not completely silent, but noticeably calmer than before. And in that calmness, something remarkable begins to appear: clarity. For many people, worry has been present for so long that they assume it is necessary. They believe worry helps them stay responsible. They believe it prepares them for the future. They believe it prevents mistakes. But when the mind becomes calmer, something surprising happens. They begin to see situations more clearly than before. Because worry often clouds perception. When the mind is filled with anxious thoughts, it becomes difficult to see reality as it actually is. Instead, the mind sees everything through a layer of fear and prediction. Small problems begin to look enormous. Uncertain situations begin to feel dangerous. Even neutral events can appear threatening. But when worry begins to fade, this layer slowly disappears. And without that layer, the mind begins to perceive things differently. Problems that once felt overwhelming now appear manageable. Decisions that once felt impossible become clearer. Situations that once caused panic now feel like puzzles that can be approached calmly. This shift happens because clarity and anxiety rarely exist in the same space. A mind filled with worry is like a room filled with noise. It becomes difficult to hear anything clearly. But when the noise quiets down, understanding naturally appears. Think about a time when you tried to solve a difficult problem while feeling stressed. The mind jumped between possibilities. Every option seemed confusing. Nothing felt certain. Then perhaps later, when you relaxed, the answer appeared almost effortlessly. The situation had not changed, but the state of your mind had. Clarity often arrives when the mind stops struggling. This is why many people notice their best ideas appearing during simple moments, while walking, while taking a shower, while sitting quietly. During these moments, the mind is not forcing solutions. It is relaxed, open, free from the constant pressure of worry. And in that openness, insight naturally emerges. There is another interesting effect that appears when worry fades. Life begins to feel lighter. Not because responsibilities disappear, not because challenges vanish, but because the mind is no longer carrying unnecessary weight. Imagine carrying a heavy backpack throughout the entire day. At first, you may not notice the weight, but after many hours, your body begins to feel exhausted. Now imagine setting that backpack down. Suddenly, everything feels easier. Walking becomes lighter. Movement becomes freer. In many ways, worry works like that backpack. People carry it for years without realizing how heavy it has become. They assume that constant tension is simply part of life. But once that mental weight begins to lift, the difference becomes obvious. Conversations become more relaxed. Decisions become less stressful. Even ordinary moments begin to feel more enjoyable. A walk outside becomes more noticeable. The taste of food becomes clearer. The sound of the wind becomes more present. When the mind is not constantly racing ahead into the future, it becomes capable of appreciating what is already here. And often, what is already here is far more peaceful than the mind imagined. Another change begins to appear in relationships with other people. When worry dominates the mind, interactions with others can become tense. We may overthink conversations. We may worry about how we are being judged. We may feel pressure to control how others perceive us. But when the mind becomes calmer, these pressures begin to soften. We listen more carefully. We respond more naturally. We become less concerned with controlling every impression. This creates a sense of ease in social situations. People often feel more comfortable around someone who is calm and present. The conversation flows more naturally. Connection becomes easier. But perhaps the most important change appears in the way we relate to uncertainty. When worry dominates the mind, uncertainty feels threatening. Every unknown possibility appears dangerous. But when the mind becomes calmer, uncertainty begins to look different. Instead of appearing as a threat, it begins to look like openness, possibility. The future is no longer something that must be controlled. It becomes something that can simply unfold. This does not mean we stop planning or preparing, but the emotional pressure around the future disappears. We do what we can today. Then we allow tomorrow to arrive when it arrives. This attitude brings a quiet sense of freedom. Life begins to feel less like a problem to be solved and more like an experience to be lived. And as this perspective deepens, something even more surprising begins to appear, a realization that many philosophers have described throughout history. Peace was never something we needed to chase. It was always present beneath the noise of constant thinking. Worry simply covered it. Like clouds covering the sky never disappeared. It was only hidden. And when the clouds slowly move away, the open sky becomes visible again. In the same way, when worry loses its hold on the mind, something that was always there begins to reappear. A quiet sense of ease, a sense that life does not need to be controlled to be experienced fully. But to understand this completely, we must look at one final realization, a realization that brings everything we have explored together into a single understanding. Because the moment we stop chasing peace, we often discover that it was already here all along. Chapter 8. Peace was here all along. There is a quiet realization that often appears at the end of a long search. It does not arrive with dramatic excitement. It does not feel like a sudden victory. Instead, it feels gentle, almost obvious, like discovering something that had been in front of you the entire time. For many people, the search for peace begins with the belief that peace must be created. They believe peace will arrive when life becomes more stable, when problems disappear, when the future becomes predictable, when everything finally goes according to plan. But as we have explored throughout this journey, life rarely becomes perfectly predictable. Unexpected events continue to appear. Circumstances continue to change. The future continues to unfold in ways no mind can fully control. If peace depended on controlling every aspect of life, very few people would ever experience it. Yet history shows something very different. Across cultures and centuries, many individuals have discovered a deep sense of calm, even in uncertain circumstances. Monks living in simple temples, philosophers walking through crowded cities, ordinary people facing the same unpredictable world we all live in. Their peace did not come from controlling life. It came from understanding the mind. At the beginning of this audiobook, we explored how the mind naturally creates worry. It imagines possible problems. It predicts uncertain futures. It tries to control situations that may never happen. This process is not a personal flaw. It is simply the way the human mind evolved to survive. But once we see this pattern clearly, something begins to change. We stop believing every thought the mind produces. We begin to observe them instead. Thoughts still appear, but they lose their authority. They become events passing through awareness, rather than commands that must be followed. This shift creates space inside the mind, and within that space, peace begins to reveal itself, not as something new, but as something that was quietly present beneath the noise of constant thinking. Imagine a lake on a windy day. The surface of the water becomes restless. Waves move in every direction. Reflections become distorted. But beneath the surface, the water remains calm, still, undisturbed. The waves do not create the water. They only disturb its surface. In many ways, the mind works the same way. Thoughts and worries move across the surface of awareness like waves across water. When the waves are strong, it can feel as if the entire mind is restless. But the deeper nature of awareness remains calm, always. Peace does not need to be created. It needs to be uncovered. The moment we stop feeding constant worry, the surface of the mind begins to settle, slowly, naturally. And when it settles, the calmness that was always there becomes visible. This understanding changes how we approach life. Instead of constantly chasing a future state of peace, we begin recognizing peace in ordinary moments. A quiet morning, a slow walk outside, the sound of rain, the feeling of breathing in and out. These moments are often overlooked because the mind is busy chasing something else. But when attention returns to the present moment, they become surprisingly meaningful. This is why many philosophical traditions emphasize simplicity. Not because life must become small, but because peace often appears in the simplest experiences. When the mind is no longer racing ahead or looking backward, ordinary moments become enough. And something else changes as well. The relationship with uncertainty becomes lighter. Instead of trying to eliminate every unknown possibility, we begin to accept that uncertainty is part of life. The future will always contain surprises, but surprises are not always negative. Many of the most meaningful moments in life arrive unexpectedly. A conversation that changes our perspective, an opportunity that appears suddenly, a relationship that grows in ways we never planned. If life were completely predictable, many of these moments would never exist. So instead of fearing uncertainty, we can begin approaching it with curiosity. Life becomes less like a problem to be solved, and more like a journey to be experienced. Each moment unfolding one step at a time, and when we stop demanding certainty from life, the mind relaxes. The need to constantly predict the future fades. Attention returns to what is real. This breath, this step, this moment. From this perspective, peace no longer feels distant. It feels present, quietly available in every moment we stop chasing something else. Of course, the mind will still produce thoughts. It will still imagine possible futures. It will still revisit memories. That is simply what minds do. But once we understand this process, we no longer become trapped by it. Thoughts can appear and disappear without controlling the entire experience of life. And in that freedom, something beautiful happens. Life begins to feel lighter, not because the world has changed, but because the mind has. We stop carrying unnecessary mental weight. We stop fighting every moment. We begin moving with life instead of against it. And in that movement, peace becomes something very simple, something natural, something quietly present. The moment we stop worrying, we begin to see what was already here, Hutis. As we reach the end of this journey together, it may be helpful to pause for a moment and reflect on what we have explored. Throughout this audiobook, we looked closely at something almost every human being experiences: worry. Not the occasional concern that helps us prepare for real situations, but the endless stream of imagined problems the mind often creates. We discovered how the mind naturally predicts danger, even when nothing dangerous is actually happening. We explored how the mind tries to control the future, even though the future has never been something any human can fully control. And we saw how this constant mental effort can slowly fill our lives with unnecessary tension. But perhaps the most important discovery was this: many of the things we struggle with are not created by life itself. They are created by the mind's habit of constantly chasing thoughts about the past and the future. When the mind is lost in those thoughts, peace feels distant. It feels like something we must search for somewhere else, somewhere in the future, somewhere after everything is finally solved. But as we slowly began observing the mind, something interesting appeared. Peace was never as far away as we believed. It was simply hidden beneath the noise of constant thinking. Like the surface of a lake disturbed by waves, the mind can appear restless. But when the waves begin to settle, the still water beneath becomes visible, and that stillness was always there. Many people spend years trying to eliminate uncertainty from their lives, trying to make everything predictable, trying to ensure that nothing unexpected ever happens. But life has never worked that way. Life moves, life changes, life surprises us. Sometimes in ways that challenge us, sometimes in ways that bring unexpected beauty. Peace does not come from controlling this movement. Peace comes from learning how to move with it. When we stop fighting every moment, the mind becomes lighter. When we stop chasing every thought, the mind becomes quieter. And when the mind becomes quiet, something simple appears: presence. The ability to experience life as it is, instead of constantly imagining what it might become. This does not mean problems disappear. It does not mean life suddenly becomes perfect. But it does mean that the mind is no longer carrying a burden it was never meant to carry. The burden of controlling everything. If there is one small practice you take from this audiobook, it might be this. From time to time, gently return your attention to the present moment. Notice your breathing. Notice the sounds around you. Notice the feeling of simply being here. You do not need to force the mind to be silent. You only need to stop chasing every thought that appears. Thoughts will come and go, just like clouds in the sky. But the sky itself remains open, calm, unchanged. And in the same way, beneath all the movement of the mind, there is always a quiet space available to you. A space of awareness, a space of calm, a space where peace naturally exists. Perhaps tonight, when the world becomes quiet again and your mind begins doing what it has always done, jumping from one thought to another, you may notice something new. You may realize that the thoughts are simply passing through, and you do not have to follow every one of them. In that moment, even for a few seconds, the mind may pause, and in that pause, something very gentle may appear. Not excitement, not victory, just a quiet sense of ease. The kind of peace that was never far away. It was simply waiting for the moment you stopped worrying. Thank you for sharing this time and reflection. And until the next moment of quiet awareness, take care of your mind, because sometimes the greatest change in life begins in the smallest moment of stillness.